We called him
Butter.
Boogeyman?
Let's face it, butter has a bad rep. We've been told to avoid it completely unless we want guaranteed heart disease or other illnesses. But for the last 10 years, the debate around butter has been shifting. Most health authorities, doctors, and scientists are telling us to avoid it, but a few, even some cardiologists, are telling us not to. Today, we'll briefly touch on the history of why we're told to avoid butter and why it might actually be being vilified. Is butter a health food, or is it the boogeyman as we know it? With approximately 805,000 people suffering from heart attacks every year in the US alone, we should really get to the bottom of this. And before I forget, I'm just a normal person trying to make sense out of things. Nothing in my videos is ever advice of any kind. Give us a like to help push the video in the algorithm, and consider subscribing if you like this kind of content. First, let's talk a little bit about the boogeyman. Of course, we've all heard the term before, but let's think about it for a sec. The boogeyman is a cultural figure, folklore, to scare kids to prevent them from doing potentially harmful things like going into the woods at night where they could get lost, or worse. The boogeyman is used as a scapegoat to help children overcome fear, uncertainty, and anxiety about imagined terrors, creatures in the dark, or other fears that can't be explained. Butter has been a boogeyman in nutrition and health for decades, used to help us to try to avoid heart disease in particular. Its high saturated fat content and apparent ability to raise cholesterol levels have made it a symbol of LDL, the bad cholesterol, to be avoided at all costs. So accordingly, a lot of us actively avoided butter and used dairy-free alternatives instead because we thought it was more healthy. To fully understand why so many of us think this way about butter, we have to review a bit of the history. In 1955, the United States was in a panic because President Dwight D. Eisenhower suffered a heart attack. Frantically trying to figure out what caused it, the medical community put its eyes on saturated fat. One of the main proponents of this idea, and member of nutritional canon at this point, Ancel Keys, believed so strongly in the link between saturated fat and heart disease that he put out two of the most talked about studies in regards to health: the 7-country study and the Minnesota coronary experiment. Some of you probably already know about these studies, but many of you won't, so I'll give them to you in a very, very tiny nutshell. The 7-country study is synonymous with the Mediterranean diet. Keys and his associates went around the world to collect data like blood pressure, and diets of communities, and found evidence that he claimed supported the hypothesis or educated guess that saturated fat elevates cholesterol, which eventually causes heart disease. The problem with this study is that it's observational. Observational studies, also called epidemiological studies, are limited in that they can only generate a hypothesis. They can't prove that one thing causes a disease or cures a disease or anything like that. Observational studies can only show association. Critics of Keys over the years have said that the countries in the study were cherry-picked to go along with his diet heart hypothesis, and that he collected data in some countries during Lent, when locals wouldn't be eating meat, which is high in saturated fat, for religious reasons. Criticism aside, Keys sought to provide more solid evidence of the diet heart hypothesis and conducted the Minnesota coronary experiment, a randomized controlled trial that involved over 9,000 participants at mental hospitals in Minnesota. The control group was fed a quote-unquote normal diet, which included saturated fats, and the intervention group was fed unsaturated fats instead of saturated fats. In the end, the intervention group saw lower LDL levels and was used to promote dietary guidelines that limited saturated fat consumption and promoted unsaturated fats, guidelines that affect us to this very day. And just like that, the boogeyman was eliminated. Butter was gone. Everyone stopped having strokes and heart attacks, and we all got healthier from it. Right? The diet heart hypothesis was once thought to be the final nail in the coffin for saturated fat and heart disease. That means butter was out. Foods high in saturated fat cause high LDL causes heart disease, and heart disease causes heart attacks and strokes. The problem is that decades later in 2019, researchers found that about 75% of people that have heart attacks don't have dangerously high LDL cholesterol levels.
What?
In addition to that, a 2016 re-evaluation of Keys' Minnesota coronary experiment found that while replacing saturated fats with unsaturated fats does lower LDL cholesterol levels, it doesn't necessarily mean the participants consuming unsaturated fats had lower risk of death from heart disease or other causes. This flies in the face of what we've been told for years. To drive this even further, the Journal of American College of Cardiology published a review in 2020 that found, among other things, Foods relatively rich in saturated fats like whole fat dairy, dark chocolate, and unprocessed meat are not associated with increased cardiovascular disease or diabetes risk. It also found that there is no robust evidence that current population-wide arbitrary upper limits on saturated fat consumption in the US will prevent cardiovascular disease or mortality. So, things aren't looking as clear-cut as they were when Snackwell low-fat cookies were a thing, or when they started making movie theater popcorn with canola oil instead of actual butter. But, oh wait, no, that's still happening. After seeing these studies, butter isn't seeming like the boogeyman that it's been painted out to be for decades now, but the debate still rages on. But butter, if it's from grass-fed cows, actually contains nutrients that we need, like vitamins A, E, D, and the much-forgotten vitamin K2, which I made a whole video about that you should check out next. These fat-soluble vitamins are good for all sorts of things like eyesight, immune system function, and calcium placement and absorption in our bodies. Butter also contains omega-3s, as well as saturated and unsaturated fats, conjugated linoleic acid, and MCT. So, as far as butter being the boogeyman, maybe it's actually more like poor lifestyle choices and poor dietary habits are the boogeyman of health. Or boogeymen? Which would mean that butter might actually be
the one you sent to kill the fucking boogeyman.
But what do you think? Do you avoid butter and saturated fat, or do you think that it can be part of a healthy diet? Should we zero in on individual molecules or compounds, or should we look at the benefits of foods as a whole? Should we ditch butter altogether and replace it with seed oils? If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments below to continue the conversation around butter. If you learned something new, give it a like and hit the subscribe button for more content like this. I always want to give a huge shout out to everyone reaching out via the comments and email. It really means a whole lot to me. I hope this video was interesting. Thanks again, and take care.